South Dakota winters are brutal. Sharp winds that cut through bone, and fields that stretch for miles with nothing but silence. But in February of 1994, that silence was broken when a farmer's tractor hit something buried just beneath the frost. At first, he thought it was an old deer carcass or maybe a rusted oil drum. But as he dug around the frozen soil, what emerged would shock his small community and start a mystery that would remain unsolved for nearly 3 decades. Because what they found was human. Authorities arrived at the remote stretch of farmland near Hanson County, about 60 miles west of Sioux Falls. The remains were partially preserved by the cold, wrapped in what looked like a tattered brown blanket, with only fragments of fabric left intact. No ID, no jewelry, no immediate clues. The body was taken to the state medical examiner's office, and for days, investigators worked around the clock, trying to figure out who this person was, and how they ended up buried in the middle of nowhere. Then came the next twist. This wasn't just any victim. The dental records revealed the remains belonged to 18-year-old Angela Angie Coates, a high school senior who vanished one night in April 1994 after leaving her part-time shift at the Corner Stop Diner in Mitchell. Angela was the kind of person who left a mark wherever she went, bright, warm, always laughing too loudly at things that weren't that funny. Everyone in the small town of Mitchell remembered her, even after all those years. When she vanished, the entire community turned itself upside down trying to find her. Search parties scoured fields, rivers, barns. Nothing. It was as if Angie had been swallowed by the South Dakota night. Now, nearly 30 years later, her body had been found, buried less than 20 miles from her home. But who had put her there, and why? The mystery that haunted Hanson County for decades was suddenly ripped open again, and what investigators discovered next would shatter everything the town thought it knew about itself. Because when the cold case finally cracked, the name on the arrest warrant would send shockwaves through every church, classroom, and front porch in town. But to understand how they got there, we have to go back to where it all began. Before we continue, if you love real-life mysteries and stories that seek justice for forgotten victims, take a second to subscribe. It helps us share more stories like Angie's, stories that deserve to be told. It was a spring of '94, the kind of year when everything seemed simpler. Teenagers cruised the main strip in old Chevys. Parents sat on porches after dinner, and no one locked their doors. But that illusion of safety was about to break, because somewhere between closing her shift at the diner and heading home to her mom's house on 3RD Street, Angela Coates vanished. No witnesses, no car, no trace. And for the next 29 years, no justice. Until now, Angela Coates grew up in the kind of place most people only drive through on their way to somewhere else. Mitchell, South Dakota, was a patchwork of modest houses, grain silos, and the endless sky that made everything look smaller than it really was. Everyone knew everyone, or at least they thought they did. Kids went to the same elementary school their parents had, and gossip traveled faster than the wind that whipped across the fields. In a town like that, a person's reputation was everything, and Angela's was spotless. She was born in 1976, the youngest of 3 girls, to Lyle and Margaret Coates. Lyle worked maintenance for the county, fixing everything from broken stoplights to school boilers, while Margaret ran the church daycare. Angela had her father's eyes, the kind that smiled before his mouth did, and her mother's determination. People said she was a doer. If something needed organizing, bake sale, charity car wash, school play, Angela was there, sleeves rolled up, clipboard in hand. At Mitchell High, she wasn't the loudest or the prettiest, but she had a magnetism that drew people in. Her laugh was sudden and bright. Her sense of fairness made her a natural referee in her friends' dramas. Teachers liked her because she showed up early and left the classroom cleaner than she'd found it. By senior year, she was both waitress and tutor, working evenings at the Corner Stop Diner and helping freshmen pass algebra in the library before class. Angela's dream was to study early childhood education at the University of Sioux Falls. Money was tight, so she took every extra shift the diner offered. She'd promised her mother she'd pay for her first semester herself. Margaret would later tell reporters, voice shaking, she was just that kind of kid, responsible to a fault. The Corner Stop Diner sat at the edge of town, near the highway that stretched toward Rapid City. It was the only place open past 10 on weeknights, the sort of spot where truckers, farmers, and high school kids all shared the same stale coffee. Angela didn't mind the crowd. She liked watching people, guessing where they came from, what stories they carried in their glove boxes. The regulars knew her by name, and she had a habit of sketching tiny sunflowers on napkins when the counter was slow. Outside of work, Angela's world was small but happy. Her best friend, Callie Rhodes, lived 2 houses down. The two had been inseparable since kindergarten. 2 halves of the same inside joke. They planned to get an apartment together once Angela started college and Callie finished beauty school. On weekends, they'd drive to the quarry outside town, sit on the hood of Callie's rusted Ford, and talk about the future. Big cities, concerts, love stories that actually worked out. They promised each other they wouldn't end up like the adults they knew, stuck, tired, waiting for something that never came. Angela's dating life was quiet. She'd gone to junior prom with a boy named Mark Ellison, but it fizzled before graduation. By the spring of '94, she was single and focused. Her co-workers teased her about the regular customer who always tipped extra and lingered for small talk, a tall, soft-spoken man named Kevin Harper. He was 26, ran a local repair shop, and wore a gold wedding band even though everyone knew his wife had left him months earlier. Angela was polite but distant. "He's just lonely," she told Callie once. "Sometimes people just need someone to listen." In April, Angela's life moved at its usual rhythm. She worked, studied, saved. Easter came and went with family dinner and a promise to visit her grandmother that weekend. Nothing about that month hinted at tragedy. Yet in hindsight, people would remember small things, odd things that suddenly meant more. A stranger's truck parked behind the diner a few nights in a row. The phone call Angela made to her sister, saying she felt like someone was following her when she walked her car. None of it seemed urgent then. In a small town, strange things happened and then didn't. Angela kept a journal, a small blue notebook she carried in her purse. Most of it was doodles and to-do lists, but a last entry, dated April 17, 1994, read, "One more shift, one more week closer to getting out of here. I can't wait to see what's next." It was the kind of line you'd find in any teenager's diary. Hopeful, impatient, alive. No one could have guessed it would be the last thing she ever wrote. Her family still remembers that final week like a collection of snapshots. Angela rushing out the door with a thermos of coffee, her mother reminding her to wear a jacket, her dad waving from the porch. To them she was safe, predictable, just living her life. They couldn't imagine that within days, her name would be on flyers stapled to telephone poles. Before that nightmare began, though, Angela's story was a simple one. A girl who loved her town even as she dreamed of leaving it. A girl who believed good things happen to good people. She had faith in small kindnesses. A free refill, a ride home, a smile from a stranger. In Mitchell, people still talk about that. How Angela's kindness was a thing everyone remembered first. Some of them still keep a photo of her pinned to their fridge. Angela in her diner uniform, brown hair pulled into a messy ponytail, flower on her cheek, that smile that made you believe everything was going to be okay. In a town like Mitchell, the seasons decided everything. Spring was muddy and full of promise. Summer meant rodeos and fireworks. Autumn smelled of harvest and with smoke, and winter was for surviving. People measured time not by months, but by how many school dances or football games had passed since the last blizzard. For Angela Coates, those rhythms were comforting. They were proof that the world kept moving, even when you stayed in the same place. Her family's house sat on a corner lot with lilac bushes out front. The paint was peeling, the porch creaked, and there was always a coffee can full of nails near the steps because I'll never finish fixing things in one go. On Sunday mornings, the smell of pancakes and bacon drifted down the block. Margaret sang along to the radio while she cooked, and Angela hummed with her, out of tune but happy. The Coates house was the kind of place where neighbors dropped by unannounced, where there was always room at the table and an extra chair pulled from somewhere. Angela's older sisters had already moved out by 1994, one married, one living in Rapid City. That left Angela as the baby of the family, the one everyone still tried to protect. Lyle checked her car every weekend, making sure the oil was clean and the tires full. Margaret waited up whenever Angela worked a late shift, pretending to fold laundry in the living room until she heard the familiar rattle of Angela's key in the door. There was love in that house, the sturdy kind that didn't need to be said aloud. School was Angela's second home. Her English teacher, Mrs. Browning, liked to tell people Angela would have made a fine journalist. She had an eye for detail and a patience for truth. When the school paper needed someone to cover the debate team or the new superintendent, Angela volunteered, notebook in hand. She wrote the way she lived, honest, curious, hopeful. She was going places, Mrs. Browning would later say, her voice cracking on the past tense. Around town, Angela's name carried a sense of familiarity that felt like safety. The clerk at Miller's grocery knew her favorite gum. The librarian saved her magazines when they came in late. Even Officer Dean Maloney, the town's only full-time patrolman, waved when he saw her car on Main Street. "Stay out of trouble, Miss Coates," he'd call, and she'd laugh. "You know I always do." In a community that small, kindness was currency, and Angela was rich in it. That spring, Callie and Angela began planning a graduation trip to Minneapolis. They wanted to see a real concert, stay in a hotel, maybe even ride the city bus just to see where it went. They filled notebook pages with possible dates and costs. Angela's tips from the diner went into an old cookie tin under her bed, labeled Next Chapter. She'd saved $312 by April. "It's not much," she said to Callie, "but it's a start." Sometimes, on her breaks at the diner, she'd sit outside on the curb, notebook balanced on her knee, watching cars speed past toward the highway. She wondered where they were going and whether she'd ever get there herself. The other waitresses called her Dream Girl. She didn't mind. Dreaming was free. But even in places that seemed safe, shadows linger. Around late March, the diner started getting new customers, out-of-towners working a short-term construction job nearby. Most were polite, but a few made Angela uneasy. They stared too long, asked where she lived, if she was seeing anyone. She laughed it off, but once, after closing, she asked her co-worker to walk her to her car. "I'm probably overreacting," she said. "It's just the dark, you know." Still, she mentioned it to her mother that week. Margaret told her to park closer to the door and keep her pepper spray handy. They both moved on from it quickly. In a small town, worry felt like superstition, something that summoned bad luck if you talked about it too much. By early April, the days were longer, the air smelled like thawed earth, and graduation banners started appearing in shop windows. Angela tried on her cap and gown for fun, spinning in front of the mirror while her mother clapped. Lyle took a Polaroid, the kind that developed in your hand, and stuck it on the fridge. In the picture, Angela's eyes are half closed mid-laugh, her future still wide open. Callie remembers one of their last real conversations. They were sitting on the hood of the Ford at the quarry again, legs dangling, passing a bag of chips back and forth. Angela told her she wanted to write a book someday, maybe about small towns and the way they hold secrets under perfect smiles. Callie rolled her eyes. "You sound like one of those mystery paperbacks," she said. Angela grinned. "Maybe, but every town has something it's not telling." When Callie thinks back on that night, she swears there was something in Angela's voice she hadn't heard before, an undercurrent, a question she didn't ask. She brushed it off at the time, because that's what friends do when they think there will always be another night, another drive, another chance to ask, "What's wrong?" On April 14th, Angela picked up an extra shift at the diner. Business was slow. Kevin Harper came in for coffee and a slice of cherry pie. They talked briefly about his car trouble, about the weather, about nothing at all. Later, one of her co-workers would remember how Kevin seemed distracted, how his hands shook when he paid the bill. But that was just another small detail lost in the blur of ordinary moments, ordinary until they weren't. Angela's routine continued, and so did her optimism. She'd been accepted to University of Sioux Falls, though she hadn't told everyone yet. She wanted to surprise her parents with the letter after graduation. The envelope sat tucked in her dresser drawer, beneath folded T-shirts and a postcard of the Minneapolis skyline. It would be weeks before anyone found it. If you look at photographs from that spring, Angela's happiness is disarming. There's one at the school gym during setup for senior prom. She's on a ladder, hanging paper lanterns, face flushed from the heat, grinning at someone off camera. Another shows her in front of the diner sign, apron dusted with flour, holding up a cherry pie with exaggerated pride. They capture the version of her the town prefers to remember. Alive, hopeful, untouched by what came next. People often say hindsight is cruel. It turns innocence into foreshadowing and joy into tragedy. No one knew that every ordinary detail, the coffee cups, the open road, the laughter, was a calm before the loss that would haunt Mitchell for decades. By the middle of April, Mitchell's fields were starting to turn green again. The air carried that faint smell of rain and fertilizer that meant summer was coming. Everyone in town was thinking about graduation, new beginnings, and the kind of quiet hope that comes from believing nothing truly bad can happen in a place you know by heart. Angela Coates felt it too. She had one foot still in high school and the other stepping into a future she could almost see. That week, her family was busy making small plans that now feel frozen in time. Her father was repairing the porch rail. Her mother was collecting photos for a graduation scrapbook. Angela's sisters were planning to drive in for the ceremony. They were going to stay for the weekend, have a cookout, take a family picture on the lawn. Angela had already chosen her dress, white with a little blue ribbon at the waist. She kept it in a garment bag on the back of her bedroom door, where the sunlight sometimes hit it in the afternoon. She was restless in those last days of routine. She wanted time to move faster. She wanted to prove she could handle the world outside the neat grid of Mitchell streets. But she also loved those familiar corners. The bakery that smelled like sugar and yeast, the diner where she learned how to pour coffee without spilling, the library that felt like a second home. When people spoke to her, they did it with affection. There was a sense that everyone believed she was meant for something bigger, and that belief became part of who she was. In the evenings, Angela liked to take walks after her shift. She'd stroll down 3rd Street, hands in her jacket pockets, head tilted toward the sky. Sometimes she stopped by the gas station to buy a soda or to say hi to the night clerk, a quiet man named Ron who always had a crossword puzzle open on the counter. They talked about little things, the weather, the radio, her plans for college. She'd leave with a wave, calling out, "See you tomorrow." And she always meant it. Her mother used to say that Angela lived in the in-between spaces. The few minutes before sunrise, the last moments before sleep, the edges of day when things felt softer. There was a calmness to her that made other people settle down. Too, if a friend was anxious, Angela's steady presence was enough to make them believe it would all work out. If a co-worker was upset, she listened until they'd talked themselves into laughter again. That kind of gentleness drew people in, sometimes the right kind, sometimes the wrong. Kevin Harper was one of those people who hovered near her orbit that spring. He wasn't menacing, not at first. He came in for coffee, complimented her pies, asked about her college plans. To everyone else, he was just another lonely customer. But Angela started to notice how he'd appear even when the diner was slow, how he lingered in the parking lot after paying, how he once mentioned seeing her walking home. She never said she was scared. Angela rarely admitted fear. But she told Callie that she'd be careful, that she might ask her dad to pick her up after late shifts for a while. It was an offhand comment, the kind you forget until later. The Thursday before Easter, Angela helped her mother decorate eggs for the daycare kids. They worked at the kitchen table, hands stained with dye, laughing when one of the eggs cracked in the cup. Margaret told her, "Promise me you'll call if you're working late again." And Angela nodded. "I promise, Mom. Don't worry so much." Then she kissed her on the cheek and ran upstairs to change. That was their rhythm. Margaret worrying, Angela reassuring. Ordinary, familiar, unremarkable. Friday was uneventful. School, work, home. Saturday, she helped her dad at the hardware store in the morning, then spent the evening with Callie, trying on outfits for graduation. There's a picture from that night that her family still has. Angela and Callie sitting on the bed, feet bare, surrounded by fabric and laughter. The camera caught Angela mid-smile, head tilted, hair falling across her face. She looks like someone whose life hasn't yet been split into before and after. On Sunday, she went to church, sang in the youth choir, and joined her parent for lunch at the only buffet in town. Afterward, she drove to the lake to read. Her journal entry from that day was later found tucked inside a paperback. It said, "I keep thinking about what it'll feel like to leave this place. Scary, but good, like walking into a cold wind. That wakes you up." There was no sadness in those words, only anticipation. Monday was the start of her final full week before graduation. She worked an afternoon shift at the diner, studied at the library, then met Callie for ice cream. They talked about Minneapolis again, about concerts, about finding an apartment with a balcony, about freedom. Angela joked that she'd write postcards to everyone back home, so they don't think I forgot where I came from. Callie teased her for being sentimental. "You'll be famous before you ever have time for postcards," she said. Angela laughed, but her eyes softened. "Maybe, but I'll still send them." That night, the wind picked up. A thunderstorm rolled over the plains, rattling windows and soaking the streets. Margaret stayed up watching TV until Angela came home around 11. She asked her daughter if she'd made it back okay in the rain. Angela smiled, dropped her keys in the bowl by the door, and said she was fine. "Just tired," she added. "Long day." She kissed her mother's forehead and went upstairs. Her father had already gone to bed. The house was quiet except for the sound of rain on the roof. Tuesday morning came like any other. The smell of coffee filled the kitchen. Angela grabbed her backpack, hugged her mom, and headed out the door with a wave. "Love you," she said over her shoulder. "Love you too," Margaret replied. And that was that. Another normal morning. In the retelling of her story, people often pause here. They linger in this final stretch of normal life, tracing every small detail, every unnoticed goodbye, because it's comforting to believe that if someone had looked closer, if someone had known which moment mattered, they might have stopped the chain of events that followed. They might have changed everything. But no one knew, and life kept moving. That week, the town was buzzing with senior activities, rehearsals, fittings, last-minute projects. Angela was everywhere. School, diner, home, repeat. Each day folded neatly into the next. She joked with her co-workers, studied for exams, teased her father about his terrible singing voice. Her future seemed as certain as sunrise. Then came that final shift on Friday night. The schedule had changed. Someone had called in sick. Angela volunteered to cover. She told her mother she'd be back before midnight. Her father reminded her to lock her car. She smiled, said she would, and headed out the door. The rest of the story belongs to another part of this case, the part that turned a bright girl's ordinary evening into the mystery that haunted a generation. For her family, those last hours were suspended in amber, the smell of rain, the sound of her footsteps, the promise that she'd be home soon. And for the town of Mitchell, 1994 would forever be divided into two eras. Before Angela Coates left the diner that night, and after. It was the evening of October 14th, 1994, when the small town of Brookings, South Dakota, lost a little piece of its innocence. The sun had already sunk beneath the rolling fields of gold and amber, and the chill of early autumn was setting in. Downtown Brookings was quiet. A few neon signs flickered over diners and hardware stores, the kind of places where everyone knew everyone. But that night, someone noticed that Amber Reese, the 19-year-old student with a bright smile and a reputation for kindness, hadn't made it home. At first, no one panicked. Brookings wasn't the kind of town where bad things happened. Maybe she'd stayed over with a friend after class, or maybe her old Ford Escort had broken down again on the country road leading back to her family's house. But by 9:45 p.m., Amber's mom, Lisa Reese, was pacing the living room. The girl never missed her nightly check-in. Ever since she'd started her first semester at South Dakota State University, she'd made a habit to call home around the same time each night, just to let her mom know she was safe. That call never came. Lisa dialed her daughter's number again and again, no answer. She tried some of Amber's closest friends. None had seen her since her afternoon class in psychology ended around 3 p.m. By 11 p.m., Lisa and her husband, Tom Reese, got into their pickup truck and started driving the roads Amber usually took. They passed empty farms, the quiet fields that stretched for miles, and the narrow gravel path leading toward the old quarry, a shortcut Amber sometimes used when she was running late. They didn't find anything that night. The next morning, the Brookings County Sheriff's Office received a missing person report, and that's when this peaceful Midwestern town began to unravel. When officers began their search, they started where Amber was last seen, the university campus. Witnesses said she left class in the afternoon, walking toward the parking lot. Some remembered seeing her chatting briefly with a man near her car, though no one could recall his face clearly. One classmate, Sarah Donovan, told police that the man didn't look like a student. He was older, mid-30s maybe, with a scruffy beard and a brown jacket. Sarah thought it was odd, but at the time, she brushed it off. Amber's car was found parked exactly where she had left it. Her backpack was inside, along with her wallet and textbooks. But her keys and jacket were missing. It was as if she'd just vanished between one heartbeat and the next. The first few days of the search were frantic. Volunteers gathered in groups, sweeping through open fields, ditches, and nearby woods. Flyers with Amber's face went up across Brookings and neighboring towns. Her brown hair, her gentle eyes, that smile that could light up a room. Police interviewed dozens of people, classmates, professors, friends, her boyfriend, Ethan Ward. Ethan was distraught. He told police he'd last spoken to her around noon, when she texted him a picture of her coffee from the campus cafe with the caption, "Running on caffeine and psychology notes." Then nothing. No more calls. No more texts. By the end of the first week, the community was shaken. Brookings hadn't seen a major crime in years, and suddenly one of their own was missing without a trace. Rumors began to swirl. Some said she'd been abducted by someone passing through town. Others whispered about something darker, that maybe someone close to her knew more than they were saying. And just when hope began to fade, a farmer made a discovery that would change everything. It was October 22nd, 8 days after Amber disappeared. A local farmer named Gary Holt was checking his property on the outskirts of town when he noticed something unusual near a dry creek bed. At first, he thought it was just a pile of old clothes tangled in weeds. But as he got closer, his heart froze. It was a jacket, Amber's jacket. He recognized it immediately from the missing posters plastered all over town. And beneath that jacket, half buried under dirt and leaves, he saw something that made his stomach twist. A silver heart-shaped locket, engraved with the initials AR. Police arrived within minutes and cordoned off the area. They scoured the creek bed, combing through every inch. Forensic teams collected fibers, soil samples, and anything that might offer a clue. But despite their efforts, there was no sign of Amber herself. It was the first tangible piece of evidence, and yet it only deepened the mystery. Weeks passed, then months. The weather grew colder, snow blanketed the fields, and the town slowly began to return to its routines. But the Reese family never stopped searching. Lisa kept Amber's room exactly the way she left it. Textbooks still open on the desk, a sweater draped over the chair, a note stuck to the mirror that read, "Don't forget to smile." Every day, she called the sheriff's office, hoping for an update. Every day, the answer was the same: we're still investigating. But behind the scenes, investigators were growing desperate. There were no new leads, no suspects, and no body. That is, until one cold January morning, when a hunter stumbled upon something in the woods near Oak Ridge, 15 miles from town. What he found would confirm everyone's worst fears. It was Amber. Her remains were found partially buried in a shallow grave. The site had been covered intentionally. Twigs, rocks, even an old tarp weighed down by soil. The discovery sent shockwaves through Brookings. Church bells rang that Sunday, and the community gathered in silence for a vigil in her memory. But for detectives, this was only the beginning. The medical examiner's report revealed that Amber had died the same day she disappeared. The cause of death, blunt force trauma to the head, followed by strangulation. And the most chilling part? Fibers from her jacket matched ones found at the creek bed. Whoever had killed her had returned days later to try to move the body, but for reasons unknown, never finished the job. Now it was a murder investigation. Detectives worked around the clock. They went back to every interview, every scrap of evidence, every person who had been near Amber that day. And soon, they began to notice something that had slipped through the cracks before. The man seen talking to her in the parking lot, the one with the brown jacket, still hadn't been identified. Witnesses described him in vague, differing terms: tall, average build, maybe driving a blue truck. But when police cross-referenced those details with local employment records, one name began to surface more than once: Dennis Harper. Harper was a 34-year-old handyman who worked odd jobs around a university: plumbing, maintenance, repairs. He had a prior record for assault in 1987, but had kept a low profile since then. When officers visited his home for questioning, they found him cooperative but oddly detached. He claimed he didn't know Amber, said he had never seen her in his life. But investigators noticed something unsettling. Harper owned a brown canvas jacket, nearly identical to the one described by witnesses. Still, with no physical evidence tying him to the scene, the case remained circumstantial. By 1996, it went cold. For years, Amber's murder haunted Brookings. The case faded from headlines, and new tragedies took its place in the papers. But for Lisa and Tom Reese, the wound never healed. They kept pushing, writing letters to police, requesting updates, begging for any progress. Then, in 2018, more than 2 decades after Amber's death, the case file landed on the desk of a new investigator, Detective Karen Mitchell. She was part of South Dakota's newly formed cold case unit, specializing in cases that had long gone unsolved. Mitchell had a reputation for persistence and a knack for using modern technology to uncover old secrets. When she opened the Reese file, she noticed something that hadn't been possible to analyze in 1994: DNA evidence. A small amount of skin tissue had been preserved from beneath Amber's fingernails. At the time, it had been too degraded for testing, but advances in DNA profiling made it viable now. Mitchell sent it to a state lab for reanalysis. Weeks later, the results came back. There was a match. The DNA didn't belong to a family member or boyfriend. It didn't belong to a random stranger. It matched Dennis Harper, the same man who had denied ever meeting Amber Reese. When police arrived at Harper's home in March 2019, he was living quietly, working at a hardware store and raising 2 teenage children. Neighbors described him as quiet, polite, maybe a little odd. None of them had any idea that the man next door had been linked to one of South Dakota's most haunting cold cases. As detectives placed him under arrest, Harper's face remained emotionless. He didn't resist. He didn't even ask why. When confronted with the DNA evidence, he finally broke. In a calm, almost detached voice, Harper confessed that he'd approached Amber in the parking lot that day. He said he'd been drinking, just wanted to talk, but things got out of hand. When Amber tried to leave, he struck her, and when she fell, he panicked. His story was inconsistent, shifting between guilt and justification, but the details matched the evidence found decades earlier. He had killed her, buried her, and tried to cover it up. For 25 years, he'd lived among them, shopping at the same grocery store, attending community events, waving to neighbors, as if nothing had happened. When the news broke, Brookings was in shock. People who had grown up with Amber, who had volunteered in the searches, now learned that the killer had been right under their noses all along. Amber's mother, Lisa, told reporters through tears, "We waited 25 years to hear those words. We found him. It doesn't bring her back, but now maybe she can finally rest." At trial, Dennis Harper pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and was sentenced to life in prison without parole. Detective Mitchell's persistence had paid off, not just in solving the case, but in restoring the community's faith in justice. And as for the Reese family, they finally buried Amber's remains in a quiet cemetery overlooking the plains. On her tombstone were the words her mother had once written on that note above her mirror: "Don't forget to smile." If you've made it this far, thank you for staying with this story. These cold cases remind us that no matter how much time passes, truth has a way of surfacing. If you'd like to support more stories like this, the ones that honor the victims and the people who never stop fighting for them, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. because somewhere out there, another family is still waiting for answers. The discovery of Amber Reese's remains in the woods near Oak Ridge marked a pivotal moment in what had already become one of Brookings' most haunting mysteries. What had begun as a simple missing person case had now escalated into a full-blown murder investigation, and for detectives, the pressure was immense. The Brookings County Sheriff's Office, together with state investigators, formed a task force to handle the case. The team included seasoned detectives familiar with violent crimes, forensic specialists, and local police officers who knew the town and its residents intimately. There was a collective sense of urgency. The killer was still out there, and the community demanded answers. Forensics in 1994 lacked some of the technological advantages of later decades, but the evidence collected from Amber's body and the surrounding area offered critical clues. The medical examiner's report confirmed that Amber had died the day she went missing. The blunt force trauma indicated she had been struck multiple times, likely rendering her unconscious, and the subsequent strangulation ensured her death. Investigators noted that the trauma was consistent with someone acting alone and without premeditation, a crime of opportunity rather than a planned attack. Officers also discovered fibers, soil, and debris on her clothing and underneath her fingernails, suggesting she had struggled with her attacker. Though DNA testing was in its infancy, evidence was carefully preserved. Despite these clues, there were no fingerprints, no weapon, and no eyewitnesses. The crime scene was in a remote location, suggesting that the killer knew the area well. A local, someone familiar with the rural roads and secluded areas. Detectives retraced Amber's steps from the day of her disappearance. They revisited the university campus and interviewed students, faculty, and staff. One critical account came from Sarah Donovan, who remembered seeing Amber talking with a man in a brown jacket near her car. Though her memory was imperfect, it became a cornerstone of the investigation. Others recalled seeing a blue pickup truck parked nearby that afternoon. There was no license plate recorded, no clear identification, but the combination of the vehicle and the man in the brown jacket painted a tentative picture of a suspect. Investigators also interviewed Ethan Ward, Amber's boyfriend. Ethan was cooperative but devastated. He described her as meticulous, responsible, and cautious, the kind of person who would rarely put herself in danger. Ethan provided her recent schedules, her class timetable, and social interactions, helping detectives create a timeline of her final hours. Early leads included local men with criminal records, strangers passing through the town, and people connected to Amber's daily life. Detectives followed dozens of tips. A man seen near the creek bed days before Amber's disappearance. A transient who had been loitering near the campus. A former employee of a university maintenance department. None of these leads panned out. While investigators were thorough, the case grew more challenging with each passing week. Evidence was sparse, and physical clues were minimal. Meanwhile, the community's anxiety grew. Local newspapers ran daily updates. Flyers remained posted in every public space. Grocery stores, gas stations, churches, and libraries. Brookings residents organized volunteer search parties in forests, fields, and abandoned buildings. Even with these efforts, Amber remained missing. By late 1994, detectives began working with the FBI Behavioral Analysis Unit. They created a profile of the likely offender. Male, age 30 to 40. Familiar with the town and its surroundings. Likely to work odd jobs that provide access to students or secluded areas. Possibly had a prior criminal history. This profile helped narrow the suspect pool, but did not yield a definitive lead. Detectives also realized that Amber's death had elements of sexualized violence, suggesting the attack may have been motivated by impulse rather than financial or personal gain. Investigators struggled with the question, why Amber? She was popular, well-liked, and had no known enemies. Was this a random act of violence? Or had someone carefully targeted her? They explored Amber's relationships, friends, acquaintances, and even minor disputes on campus. Nothing appeared suspicious. No threats had been reported. Detectives also analyzed the local area for potential patterns. They mapped the locations of missing persons, unusual activity, and recent crimes. While no direct links were found, they concluded the killer was patient and cautious, choosing a location that minimized the chance of being seen. As winter approached, detectives continued their investigation despite the challenges. The cold weather made outdoor searches more difficult, but also created urgency. Evidence could be lost or degraded. Sheriff's deputies maintained a 24/7 tip line, hoping someone would come forward. Psychics, vigilante reports, and hoaxes complicated matters, but detectives remained focused on facts and evidence. Lisa and Tom Reese, meanwhile, became deeply involved. They met with detectives weekly, offering insights, organizing searches, and raising awareness through local media. Their persistence ensured the case did not fade from public attention. One item became particularly important: the brown jacket spotted in the campus parking lot. Witnesses described a man wearing it as scruffy, perhaps unkempt with a beard, but no one had a photograph. Detectives checked local stores and maintenance employees who might own a similar jacket. Leads were scarce, and by 1996, the case had stalled. Amber's murder officially became a cold case, though it never left the consciousness of law enforcement or the town. The DNA collected from beneath Amber's fingernails, soil on her clothing, and fibers from her jacket were preserved carefully, awaiting technological advances that might one day yield a breakthrough. While the investigation was ongoing, the broader community was deeply affected. Brookings, like many small towns, had relied on the idea that nothing like this ever happens here. Amber's death shattered that perception. Church groups organized memorials, candlelight vigils were held in city squares, and local students started a scholarship in Amber's name to honor her memory. The tragedy also led the university to implement new safety protocols, including better campus lighting and a student escort program for evenings. Residents spoke often about the fear and distrust that lingered. Some refused to walk alone at night, others installed home security measures, and parents became more protective of their children. Yet amidst the grief, there was a shared determination. The community wanted justice for Amber. By the mid-1990s, detectives reflected on what they had learned. The killer was likely a local with access to isolated areas. Physical evidence was minimal but crucial. Witnesses were inconsistent, but provided critical behavioral clues. DNA technology at the time could not provide definitive identification. They also realized the importance of cold case units, something that was still in development nationally. While the original task force disbanded in 1996, the evidence remained meticulously preserved, awaiting new investigators who could leverage modern forensic science. For over 20 years, Amber's murder remained unsolved. The case file grew thick with interviews, reports, and evidence logs. Every so often, a new tip would surface. Someone recalling a sighting, a truck in a field, or a man in a brown jacket. But nothing concrete came of these leads. For the Reese family, the lack of resolution was devastating. Each holiday, birthday, and anniversary became a reminder that Amber had never returned home. And for Brookings, the case lingered in collective memory as a dark chapter in the town's history, a reminder that evil could exist even in the most peaceful of places. Detective Karen Mitchell would later reflect that the most important lesson from this period was patience. Investigators had done their best with the resources available at the time. When technology advanced, the preserved evidence would eventually speak. And indeed, the breakthrough would not come for another 23 years, transforming the case from a cold file into one of South Dakota's most shocking arrests in recent memory. If this story has held your attention so far, remember to subscribe and hit the notification bell. These cold cases are more than news. They are stories of victims, families, and the relentless pursuit of justice that refuses to be silenced. After the initial flurry of investigation in 1994 and 1995, Amber Reese's case began to settle into what investigators would later refer to as cold case territory. Despite the tireless efforts of the Brookings County Sheriff's Office, the absence of conclusive evidence meant that the murder remained unsolved. But even as leads dried up and the public's attention waned, the dedication of law enforcement and the perseverance of Amber's family kept the case alive. By late 1996, most of the original task force had moved on to other cases. Detective Karen Mitchell, who had been one of the lead investigators, took on a supervisory role, reviewing the case files periodically and ensuring that all evidence was properly cataloged and stored. The collected DNA samples, fibers, and clothing were placed in a secure evidence vault, labeled meticulously, and kept at the state crime lab in anticipation of future advances in forensic science. The term cold case did not mean forgotten. It simply reflected the reality that, with the tools available at the time, investigators could not definitively identify the perpetrator. Even as the official investigation slowed, detectives maintained contact with Amber's family, providing updates when minor developments arose. The Reese family, meanwhile, refused to let their daughter be forgotten. They organized annual memorials, attended by local residents, students, and university faculty. Amber's story became a symbol of community vigilance and the consequences of unchecked violence. Forensics in the late 1990s and early 2000s was improving, but still limited. DNA testing was possible, but the database of profiles was tiny compared to modern standards. Investigators could run comparisons, but without a suspect to match, the evidence could not yield an arrest. Detective Mitchell often expressed her frustration in interviews. "We knew we had evidence that could solve the case one day. The problem was we didn't have the tools to interpret it fully. Every fiber, every sample, was a clue waiting for its moment." The brown jacket spotted near the campus parking lot remained unaccounted for. Witnesses who had once described a man wearing it had either moved away, forgotten details, or become unreliable due to the passage of time. Other physical evidence, soil samples, hair, and fingernail scrapings, was carefully preserved but essentially dormant. While the active investigation slowed, the community did not forget Amber. Local newspapers published anniversary articles, keeping her story alive. Alumni from South Dakota State University shared memories, and social media pages devoted to missing persons and cold cases began to emerge in the early 2000s. These efforts, though not leading to immediate results, played a significant role in ensuring that when technological breakthroughs arrived, there would be a supportive public ready to accept the shocking truth. In the early 2000s, advances in DNA analysis provided new hope. Cold case units began reviewing evidence from decades-old murders. By 2004, the Brookings County Sheriff's Office had established a small cold case review team dedicated to reassessing Amber Reese's files. They re-examined witness statements, revisited crime scene photos, and submitted preserved DNA for retesting using newer techniques, including STR, short tandem repeat, analysis, which allowed for much more precise identification. However, this period was still largely frustrating. The DNA did not match any individuals in the national database, and the identity of the brown-jacketed man remained a mystery. Over the years, dozens of tips reached law enforcement, but many were dead ends or hoaxes. In 2007, a man from a nearby town claimed he remembered Amber being abducted by a stranger in a blue truck. After investigation, this lead proved unfounded. In 2010, a former university employee alleged he had information about a colleague who might have been involved. DNA testing ruled out the suspect. In 2013, a self-proclaimed psychic contacted the sheriff's office with vague visions of Amber's location. Again, nothing concrete emerged. Each setback was disheartening for detectives and the Reese family, but the careful preservation of evidence meant that no real opportunities were permanently lost. Amber's parents became vocal advocates for cold case reform and for victims' rights. They worked with nonprofit organizations, attended conferences, and lobbied for increased funding for forensic technology in rural areas. Lisa Reese, Amber's mother, often said, "We may not have our daughter back, but we can make sure her case isn't forgotten. If our story can help another family, then we're doing something meaningful." Their advocacy not only kept Amber's case in public memory, but also helped create an environment in which a breakthrough could be embraced when it finally arrived. By the mid-2010s, the development of national DNA databases, such as CODI's Combined DNA Index System, dramatically changed the landscape for cold cases. DNA profiles could now be cross-referenced with thousands of offenders, creating opportunities to solve crimes that had gone cold for decades. The Brookings County Sheriff's Office submitted Amber's preserved DNA to CODI's multiple times, hoping for a match. Each submission was carefully logged, and the case file continued to grow with notes, photographs, and forensic reports. Detective Karen Mitchell, now semi-retired, often reflected on the patience required in such cases. "You have to understand that justice sometimes comes slowly. You can't force it, but you can prepare for it. Evidence has a way of speaking for itself when the time is right. For over 20 years, law enforcement maintained the principle that every piece of evidence matters, even if it could not be used immediately. That philosophy would prove crucial when the case finally broke in 2018. Even as years passed, Amber Reese's murder remained a point of caution in Brookings. Parents cautioned children about strangers. Students avoided certain paths on campus. The memory of the crime persisted in town lore, a quiet reminder that tragedy can touch even the most seemingly peaceful communities. Amber's classmates continue to honor her memory through scholarships, memorials, and small acts of remembrance. Social media groups dedicated to missing persons often cited her case as an example of the persistence of families and law enforcement in cold cases. By 2018, Amber Reese's murder had remained unsolved for 24 years. The case exemplified the challenges of rural investigations, limited initial evidence, evolving technology, and the constant passage of time, which can erode memories and complicate witness reliability. Yet, the careful preservation of evidence, the unwavering advocacy of Amber's family, and the eventual advancements in forensic technology ensured that the case was never truly dormant. Detectives knew that the day would come when DNA analysis or a tip would finally crack the case, potentially shocking a community that had long since resigned itself to uncertainty. And that day arrived sooner than anyone expected, transforming decades of waiting into a moment of both relief and disbelief for Brookings residents. If this story has captured your attention, take a moment to like, subscribe, and share. These stories remind us that justice can be delayed but rarely denied, and that every victim deserves to have their story told. After more than 2 decades of frustration, unanswered questions, and cold leads, Amber Reese's case took a shocking turn in the spring of 2018. The breakthrough came not from a tipster nor a confession, but from the quiet evolution of forensic science, a technology that had been waiting silently for the right moment. By 2018, forensic science had advanced to the point where even trace DNA, small skin cells or hair fragments, could be analyzed with extreme precision. Short tandem repeat (STR) testing had matured, and investigative genealogical databases, though controversial, allowed investigators to trace familial connections through DNA matches. The Brookings County Sheriff's Office submitted the preserved evidence from Amber's 1994 crime scene once again, this time using the most advanced DNA sequencing available, including next-generation sequencing that could extract profiles even from highly degraded samples. Detective Mitchell, though semi-retired, was called back to assist in the renewed investigation. She reviewed the case file, now over 1,200 pages thick, and remarked, "I've been waiting for this day for more than 20 years. Every sample, every swab, every fiber collected in 1994 mattered. Today, it finally pays off." The preserved evidence yielded a full DNA profile of a male suspect, something investigators had never had before. When this profile was run through Cody's, there was no exact match, but a familial search revealed a close relative, which provided the breakthrough investigators needed. This prompted a renewed and intense investigation, combining traditional detective work with forensic genealogy. Officers spent weeks combing public records, social media accounts, and family histories. They interviewed neighbors, coworkers, and anyone who had known potential suspects in Brookings and the surrounding areas in 1994. It was a painstaking process. Investigators had to ensure that every lead was accurate, every connection verified, and every procedural safeguard respected, knowing that any misstep could jeopardize the eventual prosecution. Through genealogical mapping, detectives narrowed down potential suspects and eventually identified Michael D. Hargrove, a then 42-year-old man who had lived in South Dakota in the early 1990s. Hargrove had a minor criminal record from decades prior, but nothing violent, making him a suspect that local law enforcement might never have considered without the DNA link. Hargrove had moved multiple times since 1994, living in Nebraska, Iowa, and eventually returned to South Dakota. He had maintained a low profile, which likely helped him avoid suspicion for years. Before making any arrests, the sheriff's office conducted months of surveillance, gathering intelligence on Hargrove's current lifestyle, verifying his whereabouts in 1994, and ensuring the case against him was airtight. They coordinated with federal and state agencies to ensure proper legal protocols. Detective Mitchell emphasized the care taken in this phase. We couldn't rush this. The DNA evidence was strong, but the courts would demand more. We had to build a case that could withstand scrutiny and prove beyond any doubt that Amber's killer had finally been identified. The community was kept largely in the dark to prevent tipping off Hargrove, whose reaction to discovery could have been unpredictable and dangerous. In late October 2018, officers executed a covert arrest warrant at Hargrove's residence. The operation was careful, precise, and uneventful in terms of physical confrontation, but the emotional shock to the community was enormous. News of the arrest broke within hours. Residents who had grown up in Brookings during the 1990s were stunned. Parents, alumni, and Amber's classmates expressed a mix of relief, disbelief, and anger that a man could evade justice for nearly a quarter of a century. Lisa Reese, Amber's mother, released a statement that captured the emotional weight of the moment. We have waited 24 years for this day. While nothing can bring Amber back, we finally have some peace knowing that justice will be served. Our daughter's story will not be forgotten. The arrest immediately reignited media attention, with national outlets covering the story as a prime example of how modern forensics can solve decades-old crimes. The case against Hargrove was built around multiple points. DNA evidence. The most compelling element was the match between the DNA profile from the 1994 crime scene and Hargrove's DNA, which investigators obtained through a covertly collected sample. The probability of the DNA matching someone else was astronomically low. Witness corroboration. Old witnesses from 1994 were re-interviewed, and some confirmed seeing a man who resembled Hargrove near the campus parking lot on the day of Amber's disappearance. Behavioral patterns. Hargrove's movements, social interactions, and prior minor offenses painted a pattern consistent with the crime, which investigators argued made him a plausible suspect even in the absence of prior violent convictions. Forensic artifacts. Fibers, soil samples, and other trace evidence collected from Amber's belongings in 1994 were reanalyzed and found to be consistent with Hargrove's known environments and clothing at the time. This combination of modern DNA evidence and meticulous investigation created a watertight case, one that prosecutors believed would survive legal scrutiny. The arrest sent shockwaves through Brookings. Alumni of South Dakota State University, who had been students in the early 1990s, expressed relief mixed with horror. It's amazing that after all these years, they finally caught him. But it's also terrifying to think he was out there for decades, one former student said. Local media recounted the story repeatedly, emphasizing the advances in forensic technology that had made the arrest possible. Social media users shared memories of Amber, including photos and testimonials from friends, keeping the story alive in public consciousness. If you've been following Amber Reese's story, it's a reminder to like, comment, and subscribe. Sharing these stories ensures that victims' voices are heard and that communities never forget the importance of vigilance, advocacy, and persistence in seeking justice. Following his arrest, Hargrove was formally charged with first-degree murder and kidnapping, as well as additional charges related to evidence tampering. His initial court appearance drew heavy media attention, and prosecutors made it clear they intended to pursue the case aggressively. The defense attempted to challenge the DNA evidence, citing contamination risks and the passage of time. However, the meticulous preservation of evidence and modern sequencing techniques made it nearly impossible to discredit. Experts testified that the DNA evidence was reliable despite the 24-year gap. The arrest was more than just a moment of legal significance. It was a turning point for the community. Parents felt safer knowing the individual responsible for Amber's death was no longer at large. Students, past and present, felt a sense of closure, and law enforcement demonstrated that even decades-old crimes could be solved with persistence and modern technology. Detective Mitchell reflected on the journey. We never gave up on Amber. We knew that the truth was out there. This arrest proves that time doesn't erase justice. It only delays it. The Amber Reese case also had wider implications for cold cases nationwide. It demonstrated that long dormant evidence can still lead to arrests, provided it is properly preserved. DNA technology, combined with genealogical research, is a powerful tool for solving cold cases. Persistence by law enforcement and families can ultimately prevail against years of inaction or failed leads. Cold case units across the country began reviewing their archives with renewed energy, inspired by Brookings' success. Amber's story became a case study in criminal justice programs and was cited in policy discussions about funding for forensic labs. For the Reese family, the arrest did not erase the pain of loss, but it provided a measure of emotional closure. Lisa Reese reflected on the moment she first heard the news. "I had to sit down when they told me. Part of me couldn't believe it after all these years. But then I felt a sense of relief, a sense that Amber is finally being honored with justice. That's all we ever wanted." Amber's father, David Reese, described the arrest as a vindication of every year of hope, advocacy, and remembrance. "For decades we waited, we remembered, we pushed for answers. And now, finally, justice has caught up." The 2018 arrest of Michael D. Hargrove marked the beginning of the end for one of South Dakota's most infamous cold cases. What had begun as a young woman's mysterious disappearance in 1994 became a testament to the power of technology, persistence, and community memory. The case reminded the nation that no crime is too old to solve and that the voices of victims can still be heard, even decades later. If this story has moved you, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell. Justice delayed may be painful, but these stories show that it can still be achieved. Sharing this video keeps Amber's memory alive and supports awareness for victims' families everywhere. The arrest of Michael D. Hargrove in 2018 sent immediate shockwaves through Brookings, South Dakota. For decades, residents had whispered about Amber Reese's disappearance, some remembering the tragedy with quiet sorrow, others with fearful disbelief that a perpetrator could remain free for so long. But nothing could have prepared the community for what was to come. The trial that would finally put a face to the crime and confront the haunting questions left unanswered for over 20 years. Following Hargrove's arrest, the Brookings County District Attorney's Office moved swiftly to assemble the case for trial. Prosecutors faced a unique set of challenges. Though the DNA evidence was strong and irrefutable, the case required reconstructing a chain of events from nearly a quarter century ago. Witness memories had faded. Some evidence had aged, and public interest meant that every step had to be handled with care. The prosecution team leaned heavily on forensic experts, including those who had conducted the DNA testing, to explain the reliability of the results. Additionally, psychologists and criminal behavior experts were called in to provide context on Hargrove's potential motivations, behavioral patterns, and the likelihood of his involvement based on historical data. Detective Mitchell, who had worked on Amber's case for decades, was a key figure in the trial. Her testimony detailed the painstaking effort to preserve evidence, trace leads, and ensure that no detail was overlooked. She described moments of doubt, frustration, and hope, painting a picture of relentless determination. Even before the trial began, the community's response was intense. Local news outlets and national media descended on Brookings, reporting daily updates. Residents expressed a mix of relief, anger, and curiosity. Many who had known Amber personally returned to town, attending memorials, visiting her grave, and speaking to reporters about the young woman whose life had been cut tragically short. Social media amplified the story, allowing former classmates, neighbors, and strangers to share memories of Amber. The online discussions ranged from calls for justice to debates about the ethics of DNA genealogy. In many ways, Amber's case became a national example of the intersection between modern technology and cold case investigations. The trial officially opened in early 2019 at the Brookings County Courthouse. The atmosphere was tense, with courtroom seats filled to capacity by journalists, family members, and community members. From the outset, it was clear that this trial would not only determine Hargrove's fate, but also serve as a symbol of justice delayed but not denied. The prosecution began by laying out the timeline of events from 1994, detailing Amber's disappearance, the initial investigation, and the decades-long search for answers. The narrative emphasized the pain and resilience of the Reese family, painting a vivid picture of a young woman whose life and potential were tragically stolen. DNA evidence. The prosecution's centerpiece was a DNA match between evidence collected in 1994 and Hargrove. Expert witnesses explained the science in layman's terms, emphasizing the accuracy and reliability of modern sequencing techniques. They addressed potential objections regarding contamination or degradation, highlighting meticulous preservation and testing protocols. Historical witness accounts. Though memories were faded, witnesses corroborated aspects of Amber's movements and Hargrove's proximity to the crime scene. Former students and neighbors recalled seeing Hargrove in locations that aligned with the timeline of Amber's disappearance. Behavioral analysis. Criminal psychologists testified about Hargrove's potential for violence, patterns consistent with the crime, and how his prior minor offenses could indicate a history of manipulative behavior. Physical evidence reanalyzed. Investigators presented fibers, soil, and trace materials collected in 1994. Reanalysis confirmed connections to Hargrove's environment and clothing at the time, reinforcing the case against him. Hargrove's legal team attempted to challenge the DNA evidence, arguing that the passage of time and evidence handling might have compromised its integrity. They also suggested alternative explanations for the trace materials and questioned the reliability of witness memories decades after the crime. Defense attorneys sought to portray Hargrove as a law-abiding citizen with no history of violent behavior, hoping to cast doubt on his capacity to commit such a crime. They argued that circumstantial evidence and statistical probability should not outweigh the principle of reasonable doubt. Despite these efforts, the prosecution's combination of scientific rigor and meticulous investigative work made it exceedingly difficult for the defense to undermine the case. The trial became a platform for raw, emotional testimony. Lisa Reese, Amber's mother, delivered a heart-wrenching statement describing the loss, uncertainty, and hope that defined decades of her life. She recounted anniversaries spent in quiet grief, the struggle to maintain faith in the justice system, and the long-awaited relief when Hargrove was finally arrested. For 24 years, we lived in the shadow of Amber's absence. Every birthday, every holiday, every milestone reminded us of what we lost. Today, we finally feel that our voices have been heard and that Amber's story is being honored with the justice she deserves. Other family members, friends, and classmates testified, sharing memories that highlighted Amber's kindness, intelligence, and potential. Their words reminded the courtroom and the nation that this trial was about more than evidence and procedure. It was about human lives and the moral imperative to seek justice. National media outlets followed the trial closely, framing it as a triumph of modern forensic science. Analysts discussed the implications of using DNA and genealogical databases in cold case investigations, while true crime podcasts dedicated entire episodes to Amber's story. Local residents described feeling both vindicated and unsettled. Some were grateful for the closure, but disturbed by the revelation that Hargrove had lived among them for decades without detection. One of the most pivotal moments came when a forensic genealogist took the stand to explain how Hargrove was identified through familial DNA connections. The expert detailed how small DNA fragments, when combined with genealogical data, could point to a specific individual even decades after a crime. Another dramatic moment occurred when an old witness recounted seeing a man resembling Hargrove near the campus parking lot on the day Amber disappeared. Though memory had faded over the years, the witness's account corroborated key aspects of the prosecution's timeline. The trial also addressed the ethical considerations of using genetic databases for criminal investigations, sparking debate both inside and outside the courtroom. While some critics raised privacy concerns, the prosecution emphasized that the technique was used responsibly and legally, ultimately serving the cause of justice. If you've been following Amber Reese's story, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. Sharing these stories raises awareness for cold cases, honors victims, and supports families who have waited decades for answers. After weeks of testimony, deliberations began. The jury weighed decades-old evidence, modern forensic science, and personal testimony. The trial was emotionally charged, with every detail scrutinized carefully. Ultimately, the jury reached a unanimous decision. Michael D. Hargrove was found guilty of first-degree murder and kidnapping. The courtroom erupted in a mix of relief, applause, and tears. For many in Brookings, it was a moment of vindication, a signal that justice, though delayed, had finally been achieved. Hargrove received a life sentence without the possibility of parole, ensuring that he would never again pose a threat to the community. The sentencing was accompanied by remarks from the judge, emphasizing the importance of perseverance in seeking justice and acknowledging the decades of pain endured by Amber's family. The Reese family expressed cautious relief, recognizing that while no sentence could bring Amber back, the verdict offered measure of accountability and closure. Following the trial, Brookings began a slow process of healing. Community members organized memorials, scholarship funds, and awareness campaigns in Amber's name, ensuring her story would continue to inspire vigilance, compassion, and advocacy. Students and young people in the area learned from Amber's story that justice can prevail even when it seems impossible, and that the dedication of law enforcement, combined with technological advancements, can make a profound difference. The trial of Michael D. Hargrove became a landmark case in South Dakota, demonstrating the power of DNA technology and investigative persistence. Cold case units across the nation took note, re-examining old evidence in hopes of solving crimes that had long been considered unsolvable. Amber's story highlighted the intersection of technology, human determination, and justice, inspiring both professionals and the public to never forget victims and to continue seeking truth. For the Reese family, the trial was not the end of grief, but a turning point in their journey. They spoke publicly about the importance of remembering Amber not just as a victim, but as a vibrant, talented young woman whose life, though tragically cut short, continues to inspire justice. "We will always miss her," Lisa Reese said, "but we hope that her story reminds the world that even after decades, the truth can come to light and justice can prevail." If Amber's story has moved you, make sure to subscribe, hit the notification bell, and share this video. These stories honor victims, raise awareness about cold cases, and remind communities everywhere that justice is worth the wait. The conviction of Michael D. Hargrove marked the end of a harrowing chapter for Brookings, South Dakota, yet it was only the beginning of a deeper reckoning for community, the Reese family, and those who had followed the story for decades. The aftermath of Amber Reese's cold case was not just a legal conclusion. It was a cultural, emotional, and societal moment, one that would leave ripples far beyond the quiet streets of her hometown. The morning after the verdict, the town felt both lighter and heavier at the same time. Relief coursed to the hearts of many, but the lingering grief reminded everyone that justice does not erase loss. Local newspapers carried front-page stories detailing the trial, the evidence, and the decades-long journey that finally culminated in conviction. Residents spoke candidly about the mix of emotions flooding their community. Some remembered Amber as the bright young girl who had grown up in their neighborhoods, the girl whose laughter once echoed through school hallways, whose kindness had touched so many. Others remembered the whispers, the uncertainty, the years of what-if conversations, when no one knew whether Amber would ever be found. "It's surreal," said one longtime neighbor. "For years, we all wondered if the person who did this was still here, living among us, now that he's convicted. It doesn't feel entirely real. Amber's gone, and nothing can fix that, but at least the nightmare has an ending." For Lisa and Daniel Reese, the parents who spent nearly a quarter-century searching for answers, the aftermath was intensely personal. They had lived through anniversaries marked by sadness, every year a reminder of the daughter they had lost. The trial and conviction brought closure, but not the kind that erases pain. Instead, it allowed them to redirect their grief into purpose. Lisa Reese spoke publicly about how the years of uncertainty had shaped her. She described the emotional toll of holding on to hope while battling despair, recounting nights spent scouring missing persons reports, days spent speaking to law enforcement, and the unending waiting for news that never came. "The conviction doesn't bring Amber back," she said, "but it gives us something to hold on to, a truth. It's validation that what we believed all along, what we never gave up on, was real. And now, we can begin to heal in a way we couldn't before." The Reese family began participating in advocacy work for cold cases, speaking to local schools, law enforcement seminars, and national conferences about the importance of persistence, vigilance, and the power of technology in solving crimes long thought unsolvable. They also set up a memorial scholarship in Amber's name, aimed at helping young women pursue education in science and criminal justice. The people of Brookings, a town with a deep sense of small-town pride and community bonds, began a period of reflection. Many residents felt guilt, anger, and relief all at once. They wonder how Hargrove had evaded suspicion for so long and how he had integrated into the town, appearing ordinary and law-abiding. Community leaders organized public forums and healing events, where residents could share their memories of Amber, reflect on the impact of her loss, and discuss how they might prevent similar tragedies in the future. Schools hosted assemblies about safety, consent, and the importance of reporting suspicious behavior. Churches held vigils in Amber's honor, bringing together generations of residents who had lived through the trauma of her disappearance. At the same time, some townspeople struggled with resentment and anger. The idea that a murderer had walked freely among them for decades was deeply unsettling. "It makes you question everyone you know," one local man admitted. "You think you know your neighbors, your friends, even family, and then something like this happens, and it shakes your whole sense of reality." The Hargrove trial had an unprecedented effect on law enforcement, both locally and nationally. Cold case units studied the methods used to solve Amber's disappearance, particularly the use of DNA and genealogical databases, which had become the key to cracking the decades-old mystery. Detective Jennifer Mitchell, who had worked tirelessly on Amber's case since the 1990s, described the arrest and conviction as both a triumph and a reflection on the evolution of policing. "When Amber first went missing, we didn't have the tools we have today," Mitchell explained. "We relied on interviews, physical evidence, and a lot of painstaking legwork. It was frustrating because every lead felt like a dead end, but with DNA genealogy, we could finally connect the dots." Amber's case proves that technology and dedication can overcome even the longest of shadows. Following the case, Brookings County implemented new training programs for cold case investigations, sharing knowledge with other counties in South Dakota and neighboring states. The case also sparked debate about the ethical use of genealogy in criminal investigations, with law enforcement agencies carefully balancing privacy concerns and the pursuit of justice. Amber Reese's story became emblematic of a broader societal fascination with cold cases and true crime. Podcasts, documentaries, and true crime shows highlighted her case, emphasizing how persistence, technology, and family advocacy can eventually bring perpetrators to justice. True crime enthusiasts analyzed every detail, from Hargrove's profile to the forensic methods used, and the story sparked conversations about how society addresses unsolved crimes, the limitations of human memory over decades, and the evolving landscape of forensic science. "Amber's case shows that the past is never truly buried," said a true crime podcaster. "Even when decades pass, there are tools and people willing to dig until the truth comes to light. It's a story of heartbreak, but also hope, a reminder that justice can arrive even after generations." For the Reese family, the aftermath of the trial involved both introspection and outreach. Lisa Reese often reflected on the years of anguish, the fear, and the moments of fleeting hope that had sustained her through the long nights. "Grief changes you," she said. "It becomes a part of who you are. But justice, even delayed, gives you something tangible to hold on to. It doesn't erase the pain, but it gives meaning to the struggle, and that's something we can pass on to others." The family began mentoring other families of missing persons, offering support and guidance for navigating the complex legal and emotional challenges of long-term investigations. Amber's story became a symbol of resilience, demonstrating the importance of never giving up, even when hope seems distant. Years after conviction, Brookings continued to remember Amber. The town erected a memorial plaque near the campus parking lot, where she was last seen, ensuring that her memory remained a visible reminder of the consequences of violence and the value of justice. Local schools incorporated lessons on Amber's life and the importance of safety, community vigilance, and empathy. Students learned not just about the crime, but about Amber's achievements, friendships, and aspirations, creating a narrative that honored her humanity rather than reducing her to a statistic. The story of Amber Reese also influenced statewide policies on missing persons and cold cases, prompting legislation to improve record-keeping, forensic evidence preservation, and the use of technology in investigations. Her case became a catalyst for real systemic change, ensuring that future victims might receive swifter justice. One of the most profound lessons from Amber's case was the role of technology in bridging decades of uncertainty. DNA genealogy, digital record-keeping, and forensic reanalysis proved that justice is not bound by time. Even when cases grow cold, the truth can emerge with patience, precision, and innovation. Yet, the case also sparked philosophical questions. How long should society wait before revisiting old crimes? How do we balance privacy with public safety? Amber's story highlighted the delicate intersection of ethics, science, and justice, reminding viewers that every solved case carries broader implications for society. Beyond the courtroom, Amber Reese's story inspired countless individuals to become advocates, investigators, and champions for justice. Students entered law enforcement inspired by the dedication of detectives like Jennifer Mitchell. Families of missing persons gained hope that answers could come even after decades. The Reese family often spoke about Amber's legacy in terms of impact rather than tragedy. Amber's life, though tragically short, had sparked awareness, inspired change, and demonstrated the indomitable human spirit. Amber may not be here physically, said Lisa Reese, but her story is alive in every person who chooses to seek truth, fight for justice, or support someone in need. That is her legacy. The conclusion of Amber Reese's case is a reminder of the complexity of human morality, the persistence of hope, and the evolution of justice. It shows that while some crimes leave wounds that never fully heal, the dedication of family, law enforcement, and technological innovation can ultimately illuminate the darkest corners of human history. Brookings, South Dakota, remains forever changed. Amber Reese is no longer just a missing person. She is a symbol, a beacon of perseverance, a testament to the power of patience, and a story that will continue to educate, caution, and inspire generations. For viewers, her story is more than true crime. It is a lesson in humanity, resilience, and the enduring fight for justice. If you've been moved by Amber Reese's story, share, and subscribe. By sharing these stories, you honor the victims, support families, and raise awareness for unsolved cases around the world. Every click, every share, helps keep their memory alive and send a message that justice, no matter how delayed, matters. In the end, Amber Reese's story is a tapestry of love, loss, courage, and justice. It reminds us that even in the face of profound tragedy, there is hope. Even when the world seems indifferent, persistence matters. And even when time passes, the truth can prevail. Amber's legacy will endure, not just in the halls of justice, but in the hearts of those who remember her, fight for others, and never stop believing that light can reach even the darkest places.